Hi, everyone. Welcome to the xAPI cohort. We're happy to see you. This is day 1 of the 12-week cohort, 1 day a week, Thursdays, 2 p.m. Eastern to 2:45 Eastern. We're going to show you all kinds of things about xAPI, and it's a wonderful cohort. We've run this in the spring and fall of last year, and so we're really looking forward to doing this. But before we do, I just have a couple of things to share with you. First and foremost, I think you already know, if you don't, about DevLearn. And DevLearn is going to be a great conference, as we well know. And Jeff is going to tell us about his participation in it a little later, because we do have the xAPI user conference. And I'm going to drop some links in there later because it doesn't seem to be working. So we're going to have the xAPI hyperdrive, and it's going to be great. I'll drop a link in there. Now, as you can see, we have our little Nomi friend here in his biker jacket, and I have one over on my desk. And we're going to have the xAPI party November 2nd. It's going to be about from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific. It will show off any of the work that you've done during cohort. And it's great to mark your calendar now, and also think about what you can show people, because some people get together, and I'm going to get to that, and create a project. Some people have other learnings. And what's important about the party is you're trying to show us what you've done during cohort, how you've progressed. Now, if you're not a part of the guild, and I know many of you are not, please join. And the reason I want you to join is so that you get great information. We have a lot of free information on our website. We have publications, we have event discounts, we have session recordings, we have free webinars, and just more. So when you become a free member, you get all of that, and you get to join us. I'll drop a link in a little bit, but please become a member. So one thing we're going to do here in cohort going forward after this first week, from second week on, we're going to do a quick check-in. We're going to see if you have any project ideas, you have any other new teams you want to form, and if you have anything currently in the works. So many of you are part of Slack, and you were sent the information to join the Slack workspace. And in the Slack workspace, we have a lot of different channels. If you want to go ahead and start a team, like you were like, I think I'm going to start a team and we're going to work in Rise. So you're going to create a team in Slack, like hashtag Team Rise, something like that. And then you'll invite people who say, hey, I want to do a project in Rise using xAPI. Please come join my team. And then you can get together and talk about how you're going to do that. People will be brought on. I'm an absolute newbie. I don't know what to do. I'm an experienced person. I know exactly what to do. And if you get a bunch of newbies together, that's fine too. Drop your questions in Slack. There's a lot of people. I think there's 5,000 people in the Slack workspace. There's a lot of experts. People have been doing it for years and years, like Jeff Batt here. And we'd love to hear from you. And we're going to do that every single week. Towards the end of the session, we're going to have check-ins. And I'm going to post stuff on Slack. You can email me directly and say, hey, Karen, I'd like to, take a couple minutes at the end and tell you, I've just learned what an actor is, or whatever it is, so please participate in our collaborative sessions here. And I think I've talked quite enough. And so now I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to turn things over to Jeff Batt, and he is going to take us through an introduction to xAPI. Take it away, Jeff.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. Let me start sharing my screen here. I'll minimize that and bring up my slides. Everything look good so far? Okay. So like Karen mentioned, my name is Jeff Batt. I will try to match, I know usually the cohort, you have Megan Torrance. I can't match Megan's excitement level, but I do get excited about xAPI. So hopefully you see that, and hopefully you're excited to learn a little bit more about xAPI. I'm excited to kick this off with you. I'm going to be talking today about the foundation. So even if you have done xAPI before, if you've gone through the cohort. I've gone through the cohort myself. I created a couple sample projects through the cohort. I've been able to participate as a speaker in the cohort a couple of times throughout the years. So I love the cohort. It's an awesome experience, whether you're a newbie, whether you're somebody that's more experienced and you just want to get some hands-on work as well. It is a great opportunity for you to be able to do that. Or as Megan calls it, lurking, if you're just wanting to watch and see what this is all about. The cohort is available for every type of person. So I'm going to start out, since this is the first session, I'm going to be talking about the basics of xAPI. I'm going to go through no code. I'm not even going to talk about the code. There may be other sessions that talk about the code, but I'm at least going to talk to you about the structure of an xAPI statement. I'll talk to you about how to start sending over an xAPI statement. I'll use Storyline, but this again is a vendor neutral cohort, so we're not focused on specific tools. You can actually do this with several tools like Domino or Rise or other things like that. So hopefully you at least get the idea of the potential of xAPI and how you can start using it no matter what tool or what learning record store. If you haven't heard of that yet, we'll talk about what that is, that you can possibly use for like testing and getting to know it. And it's really just, I mean, that's how you learn. That's how I learn, is just playing around with it, testing things out, trying to kick the wheels basically of xAPI and see what you can do with it. So I've been working with xAPI for years now, ever since it was called Tin Can back in the day. That was the original name of it. Let me give you a quick background of myself. I am a learning experience developer with Amazon. I create a lot of online training for their same day. So if you order something and you have it delivered the same day, they have dedicated facility centers that will have people pack it and ship it. And basically I'll create training that will pop up and use different APIs in order to navigate to the right spot for the training. So that's my day job, but I've always been kind of teaching for years through my side work called Learning Dojo. And I have a lot of courses on Udemy. I have full courses on Storyline and xAPI. I teach a lot on Pluralsight as well, and I'm an adjunct teacher for one class down at a university. I'm located here in Utah. So, all right, enough introduction about myself. So let's go ahead and get started with xAPI. But I always like to set the foundation of, if you're new to xAPI, to talk about what xAPI is, and talk about SCORM as well, and what the restrictions of SCORM were, which is the reason why xAPI even came about as well. So let's talk a little bit about that, which is xAPI versus SCORM, and some of what you could do with SCORM and really where the limitations were. So SCORM you could track. If you think about SCORM, if you haven't heard of SCORM is just the way that you would publish out traditionally from Storyline or Captivates or whatever tool that you're using in order for it to communicate to the learning management system. So you upload your course, and that's how the course communicates to the learning management system and knows, when they start it and when they complete it. And that's really what the SCORM would do, is it would focus on start. It would track in progress where they left off. If you go and you put a course just on a website, it doesn't actually track any type of bookmarking or anything like that. So that's where, being able to do this through an LMS, that's where SCORM would be helpful. Then it would track completion and it would track quiz data. So that's the essentials. Now you could finagle the quiz data a little bit to track some other things. I'm not going to say that was the only things that you could do, but the question that I have for you is, does that track all types of learning? Am I just tracking start and complete? And some organizations, that's all they care about, and that's fine. But you're leaving so much data. You're leaving so many, is my learning actually effective enough? You're not answering that question if you're just tracking completion, or you're tracking quiz data, or you're tracking start. There's just so much more that you can track, and that's really where xAPI comes into play, is just getting more data out of your learning courses. So you're still creating the same type of learning courses, but now with xAPI data, you can track so much more out of that. You can still track the start, you can still track the completion, you can still track quiz data, but now you can track if they visited a tab, if they finished an entire video, different things like that we'll talk about. So, and this I stole from the Ristisi website, but I like how it clarifies really the potential of xAPI and how much you can actually track. So there's a lot of learning that happens in different locations. And so you have things like watching, building, thinking, writing, approving. These are activities, things that people are doing that are learning related. You have tools like books and mobile devices and computers. These are tools that people are using to access the learning or to engage with the learning as well. I know Torrance Learning had a great example of like iPads that they went through like a museum, and the engagement was on the iPad, and then it would send over an xAPI statement. Well, I'll show you. Well, again, we'll get into statements and talk about that. But all these different tools that people are using to be able to access and engage with learning. And then you have the learner. And so really xAPI puts the learner in the middle. No matter where they're at, instead of just pointing them to one direction where all the learning is happening, they can engage with all the tools that they do commonly, and you can track a lot more of these different types of activities. And then the last part, I'm actually going to go back to that slide here. Go back real quick. The last part, and this is really where the strategy, and I think this is the part that we had to figure out when I was going through the cohort a couple of years ago, is what are we going to collect? What are we going to track? Because with xAPI, you can track a lot. But the question is, do you need to track a lot? Or what do I really want to know? What is quantifiable, shareable, and trackable really is the question that you need to ask. And so that's really where I think instructional design and planning it out, strategizing with your team of like, okay, we can track this, but what do we really want to know? And what are we going to use with that type of data? So let me just put the scenario just to kind of give you still the overview here. So traditionally, we would have an LMS. The learner would log into the LMS. They would launch the course on preventing harassments, kind of the compliance courses. That data through the course basically just reports traditionally through SCORM. And then it would give you some basic analytics. But to me, and the problem with this, it works for compliance, but it doesn't, it creates this closed learning ecosystem where now you're having to point all learners to one central location. And basically you're trying to solve every problem by saying, go to the LMS, do this in the LMS, put all of your content in the LMS. I learn in all kinds of different areas. So I go to YouTube to try to search for stuff. I go to our internal resources for stuff. And so instead of having this closed learning ecosystem where we feel like we have to put everything into a box and squish it everything inside of there, really what xAPI allows us to do is learning is going on everywhere. And I'm going to try to move this real quick. Let me go back into my keynote. Learning is going on everywhere. And so xAPI allows us to take all these other resources like Udemy and LinkedIn Learning and YouTube and mobile devices and websites that are not inside of the LMS, and even live presentations or live experiences like a museum, like I talked about. And it allows you to still send data over to a central location, no matter where the experience is. And so to do this, though, the endpoint, the part that has to collect the data, is no longer the thing that's actually serving up the data. It's mostly what's actually collecting the data, and that's called a learning record store, or an LRS. And so we're kind of changing this a little bit. There are some LMSs that will do both an LMS, and so it'll still serve up that traditional those traditional courses, but it will also allow you to track content that's outside of a learning system. So we're seeing this kind of hybrid come about, which is interesting. And we're also seeing different capabilities of like even publishing to an LMS using CMI5 with xAPI data. Again, I'm just throwing out a bunch of terms here, but we'll talk a little bit about that. But that's really the possibility of being able to track, doesn't matter where the content is, being able to track that content. So an important concept to know when you're thinking about this and saying, okay, I can start tracking a website, I can start tracking a portal, I can start tracking like a Google form or something like that. The question becomes, when do I actually track these? How do I know when I can send over some data to this learning record store. And it really comes into knowing what events are. So an event is when somebody interacts with your app. So they tap on it, or this could be your website, this could be your e-learning course. When they click on it, or when they go to a page, those are different events. Now, what happens is you then use those events to track or to send data over to this learning record store. So if I want to tap if somebody clicked on a button or a tab, then I go ahead and send that event, that information over to this learning record store. And you can do this with several different you can do this with every single button if you wanted to, or you could do this with just like, again, the strategic buttons, what ones you want to track. If you want to track all tabs visited, if you want to track if the video was completed. So you're starting to track all these different events and starting to collect them inside of this learning record store. So it just basically becomes a record of learning events, things that have happened, learning that I have experienced, and the learning record store becomes that store, that's that information where you can get all of that data, basically. So again, still kind of hammering a little bit on those events. And this, whenever I'm teaching people how to create interactions inside of Storyline or Captivate or whatever tool it is, I go back to this programming flow. And don't let that word scare you. Again, we're not talking about code, but this flow happens in every tool that you may be using. So if you're creating triggers inside of Domino, or you're creating triggers inside of Lectora or something like that, this flow, you're using this flow in whatever tool that you may be using, even PowerPoint as well. So it's important to kind of know this flow, because then you can start to think, oh, this is where I put my xAPI statement. This is where I then send this over to the learning record store. So the first thing we've already talked about, which is the events. Finding out what events happen during your learning experience. And this is, again, like tab clicks or video clicks or video ends, different things like that is strategy number one, finding out what events happen. And then you send over the command. What trigger do you want to have happen? So if the trigger is show the tab layer, but you could also add on to that, and that really where it comes down to a list of commands. You could have show the tab layer, but also send over an xAPI statement. That could be the command number 2 or something like that. And then the next part that comes into play with this programming overview, the flow, is the conditions. You may not always want to send an xAPI statement whenever they click on that tab interaction. So only in certain situations would you want to send over that xAPI statement. So understanding that flow, understanding that, hey, I'm looking for events, I'm looking for commands, and I'm going to add a command to that, the list of commands, in order to send over the statements, and then putting it inside of a condition if it needs to be in a condition is really, I think, strategic to understand when you start to implement xAPI in whatever tool that you're actually using. So let's just kind of reiterate that a little bit, and I'm going to try to apply this to an everyday situation, is we work with this flow in all kinds of conditions, basically, or all kinds of situations. So for example, I'm at home and I want to turn on the TV. So to do that, I have a remote, or I have, nowadays you can use your app most of the time. And so I'll take my app and I'll click a button. So the button click, or the remote click, is an event, and it will send over a command to turn on the TV. It could do this for like turning on the lamp now. It could do it for turning up the volume. It could do for turning up the brightness and stuff. So those are different commands that will give, or pulling up the shades or different things like that. The list of commands is where you can do this all at the same time, basically. So you can have lights turn on, you can have lights dim, you can have lights turn over those colors. Those are kind of the list of commands to kind of bring that together. So you need to become kind of a sleuth in this way of like taking your e-learning course and kind of dissecting it a little bit and saying, okay, I know in this e-learning course we have a video. I want to track if the person watched the entire video. So the event would be video complete in that case. Or I know we have 4 tabs. I don't want to track every single tab, but maybe I want to track if they clicked on all 4. So that if you're using the word if and only in certain situations, that's really where you would be using a condition. And then in certain conditions, you send over the xAPI statement there. All right, so with that in mind, well, we're using this type of flow inside of whatever tool that you may be using. So in Storyline, if you're using a trigger, the action section is really the command. The when section is really the event, and you can change this to be different types of things. And then the condition is the condition. And then you can have multiple triggers. That's the list of commands there. Okay, so let's use this one example. I'm going to break this down a little bit with xAPI and video. So let's say we wanted to track if the learner has paused the video, if they reached halfway, or other things like that. So knowing the programming flow, let's go in and kind of break this down a little bit. So when a person clicks on play for the video, when they click on play, that would be an event right there. So an event happens of play. What we can do at that point is we could create a command that will create an xAPI record, and then it will send this over to a learning record store. So event number one is the play. So event number two is as they're playing, maybe we want to track if they pause the video. So event number two would be pause. And then we create that learning record and we send it over to the learning record store. So now it's like this historical record of something has happened that the learner paused the video at a certain point, basically. Well, we can do this when they reach halfway as well. So the event would be halfway, and then it would create this record and it would send over this record of this learning event to a learning record store. And then finally, the video is completed. It's going to create this record and it's going to send it over to this learning record store. So with video already, I mean, there's other things in video that you can do, but with video, you can already track a lot. So you can track play, pause, you can track halfway, you can track even a quarter of a way, you can track completion. And so that is, I know there's a lot of possibilities here of being able to really know how your learners are interacting with your data or your learning interactions. And what I find very useful is because it takes a lot to create a video. And so you may not know if your video is effective or not, or if people are even watching your video. xAPI allows you to get data to see if people are actually watching the video, or maybe they're dropping off at 2 minutes. And that's just a video example. It could be a game. It could be like a Jeopardy style game inside of Domino or Captivate or Storyline. And if you're wanting to know if they actually completed it or if they mastered it, those are types of things that you would want to use or apply xAPI to. All right, so I've used this word and I just want to make sure that you are aware of it. When I say learning record, it's basically equivalent to an xAPI statement. And so the xAPI statement is basically what is this learning record that's going over to the learning record store. And this xAPI statement really has 3 parts to it. The first part is the actor, who the person is. And so that's step number 1. Whenever you're creating these records and you're sending it over to this learning record store, so we've talked about the strategy of where you would apply this and sending it over to the learning record store, you need to know who the person is. Sometimes you can do this right through the learning management system. Sometimes you need to do this through like a single sign-on. We'll talk about that. Then the next thing is the verb. What action did they do? And we'll talk about what possible verbs you can actually use. And then the final thing is what object, and we'll describe what the object is in a little bit, but that's really the 3 main parts. Now, there's other things that go into the object. There's other things that you could define metadata with and everything into the object, but it really comes down to those 3 basic parts: actor, verb, and object. All right, so let's talk about the actor. Most of the time, the actor is captured through like a single sign-on or through a learning management system. That to me is probably the biggest challenge when you're working with xAPI, is figuring out how to capture who the person is. And that could depend on if you're using Okta, if you're using Microsoft Azure to authenticate somebody. There are different ways to be able to do that. Or you can just simply have them enter in their name and email. Or if it's inside of an LMS, it could capture who the person is through the LMS. So there's different ways to be able to do that. But when you're creating this statement, You want to know who the person is. It's going to show that inside of the learning record store. And again, like I mentioned, different ways, depending on what you're capturing, there could be different challenges into capturing who that person is. All right, the next thing is the verb. What action did the learner do? So this could be things like what SCORM can do. We can have things like started, they started a course. We could have things like completed, they completed a course. They can have things like answered, they answered questions. And so basic SCORM data you can do with xAPI as well. So there's, if you're able to produce this just to xAPI, then everything that you could capture before with SCORM is still there. There's other possible verbs. There's like downloaded, accepted, accessed, inserted, listened, read, all these different things that you could do, which opens up a whole lot more possibilities of ways to track the learning and to get this data over to a learning record store. So there's a couple resources that I wanted to share in order to find out what these different verbs are. The first one, and Karen, if you want to post these in the chat, this is that first group. This one is the tools.xapi.ly/concepts/hashtag. This is from Torrance Learning, and it is probably the most useful tool for being able to find out what verbs there are. ADL used to have a list of all the different verbs, and then they switched it over to profiles, which the verbs are still there, but I don't think it's as user-friendly to be able to find out what types of verbs are available to begin with. But then a resource you do want to become familiar with as well is profiles. And I don't know if we'll have time to talk about profiles today, but profiles, I think of it kind of like being able to, you have all these different verbs, but profiles help you organize it into like a flow. And so you have this like a recipe, basically. Like, I know I have all these different ingredients of what I can do, but a recipe gives me instructions on, okay, if you're going to track video, you want to make sure that you have this verb to begin with, you have that verb to begin with, or that verb at the end. And that helps kind of create this standard. And so now learning management or learning record stores allow you to, will make more sense of your data as well. So that's really just a high level quick introduction to profiles. Think of it as just recipes for how to use verbs. All right, so now let's talk about objects. Object is the last part of our statement here. So we have Jeff Batt. You could do read, or you could do downloaded, but the question becomes like, what did I download? What did I read? And so that's where the object comes into play. Now, this object could be like a defined activity type. It could be something like watched video, or it could be something that you define yourself, like downloaded the help guide on ethics, and that really becomes the object. Now, as part of the object, I can add metadata, I can add quiz data, I can add time spent, other things like that that kind of are optional or in addition to the object there. So when you think of an xAPI statement, you think of those three basic things: the actor, the verb, and the object. And so what we need to do is be able to track these different actors, verbs, and objects. And then the inside of the learning record store, this is what most learning record stores will give you, this type of feed. You'll be able to see all these different types of statements that have come through. So initially, I can see that Sammy McGee answered favorite food question, or Sammy McGee completed my planned course, basically, or completed my planned course with a score of 85%. So these are the initial statements. Now, if I click on this statement, it will actually expand out and give me a lot of extra data. And that data is in the format of what's called JSON or JSON. I've heard it both ways. And so it allows you to get a lot more detail if you wanted to. But the nice thing about an LRS is it will actually, a lot of the LRSs like Veracity or Learning Pool or other things like that, they will actually, one of the benefits to a learning record store is they'll allow you to create graphs. And these graphs, you can then start making sense of the data without having to look through the code or knowing how to edit the code or compile it or other things like that. So that's really the benefit of a learning record store, is being able to make sense of the data after it comes in. All right, so I want everybody, I'm going to do a little test. So you can either pull out your phone scan your phone with that QR code, or Karen, if you want to post this in chat as well. This is a little test that I built here. And I'm going to go in here, and then we're going to start building some xAPI statements. But this one is an example that I built myself, and this is a course right here. So you enter in your name, and I'm capturing who the person is just by entering in your name and entering in your email. I'm going to click on Save Learner here, and then click on Next. Now it's going to ask you if this is your first time in Cohort, second time, third time, and so forth. So go through those questions real quick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a results.html file. And this is going to, it may take a second to load, but this is a custom report that I did that is actually querying the Learning Record Store. And I forgot to mention, if you don't want your name displayed, because I am going to pull up the Learning Record Store, just you can enter in some random name or something like that. So right here, it's telling me that so far there's 10 of you that have, this is your first time going through the cohort. How much do you know about xAPI? Looks like we have people that are just starting, which is great. Very little as well. And then it gives me, this will update here in a second, but it will tell me like started versus completed. How many people have started, how many people have completed. And then it starts to give me different pages, like who has visited what page. So I'm tracking the question answers. I'm tracking the those, and you can see like text responses here as well. I'm tracking that, but I'm also tracking pages visited. Like, and this was a really interesting thing. The first time I ever implemented xAPI, we implemented having this being tracked on every single page. And we found that some people were going back to pages in the middle of the course. And we're like, why are people going back to those pages? And so we started to investigate, okay, what that was. And I think it was because of the content. People were going back to the content on that specific page, which then opens up of like, do we need more content there? Is that something that our people are interested in? So kinds of things that we would never have even thought of had we not tracked through xAPI. And then links visited. At the bottom, I provide a bunch of resources, my YouTube playlist. I have a bunch of YouTube videos, a link to xAPI Cohort, which we're here already, my website as well. But you can see all of these different kind of responses here. And this was built all custom. So even though you can, even though there are tools now that allow you to do xAPI without having to do custom stuff, you can still do custom xAPI as well. So if you have development resources, you could track a lot more content as well. So, but this, to me, I love this possibility because right now it lets me know a lot of data very quickly, and I can kind of monitor this on the fly as you, let's say, you know, you're in a classroom, maybe you have them go do something similar, and you now have this data that you can alter your presentation, you can alter your training based on the information that's coming in. So hopefully that was a cool example. That's just something that I like to show whenever I'm talking about xAPI and talk how really the power of this type of the tracking. All right, so that is one application that I wanted to show. I'm not going to get into profiles here for the sake of time, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the data that's coming in from that example that I just showed you. So I signed up for a free account through cloud.scorm.com. This is basically SCORM Cloud is the name of it. Even though it's SCORM, it still has a learning record store applied to it. I use this for all of my testing, but there is also lrs.io, which is a great one as well. That's actually Veracity. You can sign up for a free account. SCORM Cloud doesn't create reports, but Veracity does. And so if you're going to want to track xAPI, you'll need to have some type of learning record store. So you could do Veracity. We're not sure if Learning Pool allows you to sign up for a free account, but Watershed, those are different things, different learning record stores that have free versions of it. So I'm going to go back to SCORM Cloud, and I'm going to go into the learning record store right here. And I'm going to go into my LRS viewer here, and I sent all the data to this sandbox. So you can see right here, all of this data that's being sent over. So Christine, Zach, Stephen, all completed, experienced, interacted with. And if I click on this and expand it out, this is that JSON code. Even if it doesn't make sense to you, that's fine. There's a couple things that you'd probably want to look for, like this, the name of the object, which is down here, xAPI cohort, and so forth. So that is one example. Another example is I'm going to use Storyline, but the same applies if you're using Lectora or Domino or Captivate. If you just wanted to get started with tracking more data and your learning management system can handle CMI5, if you click on Publish here up on the top, and you go into the LMS LRS here, and you select this drop-down box, I would recommend not xAPI, but CMI5, which I hope there's a session on CMI5, but it's basically xAPI data, but more strict and defined, basically. And if I click on CMI5, and I can report it to a learning management system. Again, ask your learning management system if it can handle CMI5, or I can report it to an external learning record store as well. So even if I publish the SCORM 2004, I could also, if your LMS is old and it doesn't do anything besides SCORM, you can still use xAPI as well and send over the xAPI, data there. So I'm going to go ahead and just do the LMS right now, and I'm going to do CMI5. If I hit publish here, what I could do is upload this to my learning management system. And if it does CMI5, if I launch this course, and this is just a test LRS, test LMS in this case, if I launch this course, out of the box, Storyline will start tracking, and most tools will start tracking xAPI data. So if I come in here and click on the next page, and close that out, if I click on this view registration statement history, notice how it starts to send over this xAPI data. So I have Jeff Batt. I didn't have to worry about capturing the actor somewhere. It captured the actor through the learning management system. And then it said launched Cooking 101, initialized Cooking 101, and attempted Cooking 101. So it just sent over 3 statements just when it finished loading. It sends over them at a couple different times, but that's just something to keep in mind. And then it sends over an experienced when they start the page and a left when they leave the page. So it tracks every single page that you're visiting automatically inside of Storyline. I wish I could control that a little bit more, but that is just something to keep in mind. Or that's something to keep aware of. That's the data that it's getting sent over. Now, if you wanted to control the data a little bit more, Torrance Learning has an awesome tool called xAPI. So xAPI.ly allows you to send over statements and control the statements so you're not getting all this extra data that's getting sent over. But let's go into Storyline, and I'm going to add triggers here. Now I can start to track different things inside of my course. And so if I have like a tab interaction or something like that, I could come in and select this drop-down box. And inside of this drop-down box, there is this send xAPI statement. Now, the send xAPI statement allows me to select this drop-down box for the verb. What verb am I sending over? What action? Now, they only have about 12 here by default. I don't know why. I wish they had the whole list of verbs. But going back into that first link that was shared, and this is, again, Torrance Learning's awesome tool. If you come over here to this list here and just click on verb, this will give you a list of all the different types of verbs that are available. So if I wanted to use evaluated, for example, I could come in here and just copy the evaluated, and I could paste that here if I wanted to use evaluated as well. So just keep that in mind, is you're not stuck with those 12 different verbs. You can use that tool that I showed you to be able to track more. So we don't have to worry about the actor in this case if we're just publishing to CMI5. But now I want to track, and I'm going to do something different besides experienced. I'm going to track, let's do satisfied. And then I'm going to select this drop-down box. Now, the drop-down box allows me to just grab information from a variable. I can grab a title of a page if I wanted to track that they satisfied the title of the page. I could do that. Or I could go into objects, and if they clicked on a certain rectangle, I could grab the name from there. Or I could just go into custom and just custom, really, I'm just typing in some custom text. So satisfied requirements. It's, forgive my spelling, requirements number 1. So if I hit enter, it's going to send, when I come to this page, it's right now, think of the event. Remember that programming flow. The event is going to send over when the timeline starts. Now, I may want to have this happen when they click on a button or when they visit a tab or when they've met the completion. So that's why I emphasize the programming flow. So you have to keep that in mind. Let's keep it at timeline starts here. And then if I wanted it to only happen in certain situations or do it once, that's where the condition comes into play. Now, that's pretty basic, but if you click on this plus xAPI sign right here, this will take you to that JSON data. So I could actually come in here and I could change this where it says requirement 1. I can expand upon it. I can add some additional context here. Or I could come into the variable section and I could come down to, let's say I wanted to pull the data from the variable that I'm capturing, like a game, like a score or something like that. I can include that as part of my statement. So Storyline is very flexible as far as what you can do. Other tools that I've used, Captivate, you have to do a lot of custom JavaScript, but a tool like xAPI from Torrance Learning would help with that. Or Domino actually has these drop-down boxes of being able to select the same thing, which is great. Lectora does the same thing as well. So these tools are making it a whole lot easier for you to be able to track custom xAPI statements without having to be a programmer or anything like that. So now if I just click OK here, it's now just a trigger inside of my course. So if I go ahead and I hit publish, I could come in and publish this out. If I click on this report to external learning record store, there is some other things that I need to add. We don't have enough time for the sake of time here, but my YouTube playlist, there are sending over your first xAPI statements is something for you to be able to review. There are a lot of resources and previous videos in the xAPI cohort on how to send over from various tools. I'm not as familiar with Domino, but I'm assuming there are some. If you're using Domino or you're using Lectora, there's different resources there. So hopefully that's been useful for you. I know we only have a few minutes here, so I'll pause to see if there's any questions. I've thrown a lot at you. This is just getting started, but there's a lot of resources. There's a lot of experts. The cohort is awesome. There's a lot of people you can rely on and ask questions and so forth. So Karen, are there any questions that I can answer?
Well, there have been a number of questions. I'll be honest with you. I know Megan Torrance and Matt Kluwer from Torrance Learning have been in there answering a whole bunch of the questions. So
Awesome.
very much appreciate that. I did drop the bit.ly you shared with us for the article for Learning Solutions magazine, but there is a lot of resources out there and they're on the Guild site. I think they're going to curate a list for you. Marketing team is curating a list to send. But I'm glad Lisa of Lisa. Wow, mind blown. I was apprehensive, but I feel a little bit better. So
Well, that's good.
that is really awesome. And Megan's continuing answering 2 days of Jeff Batt. This week is great. So if anyone has
Well,
any
I do
questions,
want to pitch one more thing. If you are going to DevLearn, there is not only is there the user conference, but there's also an xAPI accelerator course that's 2 days. And that is, we go through everything from scratch as well. And in person, we go through how to send over statements. We go through how to set up an LRS as well. So even if you're just lurking and you at the end of it in October want to come to DevLearn and go through the 2 days, and then the next day is the user conference, the Guild has a lot of resources for you to be able to really ramp up with xAPI quickly. So
they do. And thanks for that plug, Jeff. And I know you've got your 2-day sessions there at DevLearn, and we really hope to see you. There's a number of questions in that Q&A that I really don't have time to read through for you, but if you would like, you can go in and maybe answer them for the folks because it'll still be those Q&A questions in the chat. I'll still be here. after we close the session, and so you can come back and read the answers. A lot of people were answering, and if you didn't get your answers, that's okay. We're going to cover a lot more in the next 11 weeks. Appreciate Megan Torrance and Matt Kluwer from Torrance Learning for being here, people who know way more about xAPI than I do, because I too am a newbie and a beginner, and I'm trying to learn this right along with you. So we've come to the end of our time, and I want to thank Jeff Batt for that. And I want to remind you to kind of put yourself in groups, teams, if you will. Get into the Slack channel. I did post a link to the Slack. I'll post it again. And so that you're in Slack. There's a lot of ways of participating in Slack, and I think you were sent an email on how to do so, how to create a new team, post in main. There's all kinds of channels on the side. That I did drop in there a post from one of our vendors who is giving you a free version. There's the SCORM cloud. There's a lot of different free things you can try while you're in this cohort to get your feet wet so you can understand things. So thank you so much. This was a great intro session. I agree. I hope you've got your taste buds all ready for the next 11 weeks. We'll be back here next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern. Remember to go into Slack, and I'll be posting things in Slack. And in the event you didn't get the Slack for whatever reason, you have any questions, I'm going to just type my email address if you don't have it already. And go ahead and send me an email. I'll get you situated with the Slack channel. And or if you have any other questions, we record them. As soon as I end this, few minutes later, the recording will be there. So in case you need to go back, it'll be there for you. Any last thoughts, Jeff?
No, well, one thing is, yeah, you're just starting. So this is something that, yeah, you've been given a lot, but play around with it. Play around with what you've seen already. If you have storyline, that's a way to really get to know it and participate in the cohort, participate in the projects. Even if you're again, I'm just going to keep using Megan's term, a lurker, and you're just watching, I think that at least is a good starting point for you with xAPI. The potential is there, and it's just takes us implementing it, trying it out, testing it in order for us to really ramp this up even more. So
Yep. And I just posted the Slack link. So there you go. Let's get in Slack. Let's talk. Let's figure out things together, draw from experiences from other people, put our own experiences in there. It'll be great. So thanks so much, everybody. We come to our end of time, went a little bit over, but that's okay. And we'll see you next Thursday and in Slack. Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.
thank you.